My grandfather, Franklin Mercer, sat at the head of the walnut boardroom table, smiling like he'd just placed a final chess piece. He looked directly at me. "How do you spend your $3,400,000 trust fund?" he asked, loud enough for the entire board to hear. I blinked. "What trust fund?" As the words echoed, I understood. Someone had buried this from me, and this office, and its smiling occupants, was about to learn the meaning of consequences. My name is Ava Mercer. At 32, I am the head of compliance for Mercer & Gray, a position that sounds both important and profoundly dull. It's a role that requires a specific kind of personality: meticulous, patient, and underestimated. I am all three. Friday, 8:07 a.m., the Glassridge boardroom on the 40th floor of our Norcrest Vale headquarters. The room is a sterile cathedral of corporate power, all chrome and smoked glass, with a view of the city that reduces people to specks. The air is thick with the smell of burnt coffee from a machine that costs more than my first car, a bitter perfume that always signals the start of a long day. The massive projector at the end of the table hums, casting a placid, blue-hued default screen onto the wall, waiting for the first slide of the quarterly review. It's a stage, and we are all actors playing our designated parts. My part is to sit quietly, observe, and document. It's a role I've perfected. I always record my meetings. It's perfectly legal. A declared practice outlined in my employment contract, and a necessary tool in a world where conversations are currency and memories are liabilities. A discreet tap on the bezel of my watch activates a high-fidelity microphone. The audio file is encrypted and uploaded in real time to a secure, off-site server. It's my insurance policy. Today, the premium felt unusually high. At the head of the table, my grandfather, Franklin Mercer, the patriarch and founder, presided. He was a monument of a man, even in his late 70s, with a mind that still moved like a predator. He offered a small, knowing half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile I knew well, the kind that preceded a calculated move on a chessboard. Across from me sat my stepsister, Tessa Caro, our chief financial officer. She was leaning back in her ergonomic chair, the picture of relaxed authority, tapping a silver pen against the rim of her ceramic mug. Tap, 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 a nervous rhythm disguised as impatience. She had my mother's eyes, but none of her warmth. She saw me as a necessary but inconvenient piece of the corporate furniture, the family charity case given a title. She had no idea what I was capable of. Then, the performance began. My grandfather cleared his throat, the sound drawing every eye in the room. He didn't look at the CEO, Marcus Thorne, or the general counsel, David Sterling. He looked directly at me. "How do you spend your $400,000 trust fund, Ava?" The question didn't just land in the room. It detonated. The air pressure changed. The low hum of the projector suddenly seemed deafening in the vacuum of silence that followed. From the corner of my eye, I saw David Sterling's hand jerk. A faint clatter echoed on the polished walnut as his pen slipped from his grasp and rolled across his legal pad. It was a sound as loud as a gunshot, an admission. My heart didn't stop. It did the opposite. It kicked into a frantic, hammering rhythm against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat demanding action, fight or flight. But on the outside, I remained perfectly still. I had trained for moments like this, for ambushes cloaked in corporate procedure. My gaze didn't waver from my grandfather's. I blinked slowly. "What trust fund?" My voice was steady, a carefully calibrated instrument of polite confusion. Inside, my mind was a whirlwind. $3.4 million, a life-altering sum, a sum that had been deliberately, meticulously hidden from me. This wasn't a question, it was a signal, a trigger. My grandfather had just lit a fuse, and he was watching to see who would try to stamp it out. I glanced at Marcus Thorne, our impeccably tailored CEO. His face, usually a mask of professional blandness, flickered with a brief, unmistakable flash of amusement. Schadenfreude. He was a spectator enjoying the show. anticipating the public humiliation of the quiet compliance officer. He thought I was the target. He thought this was my execution. The fool. He didn't realize the trap wasn't for me. My gaze shifted to Tessa. The tapping of her pen had stopped. Her knuckles were white where she gripped it. Her professional mask was flawless, but a tiny muscle twitched in her jaw. She was a coiled spring. I turned my attention back to my grandfather, the architect of this chaos. His eyes held a glint of challenge. This was a test. It had always been a test. I repeated my answer, this time with a harder edge, letting a sliver of the steel beneath my composure show. I can't spend what I was never told existed. The words hung in the air, an accusation wrapped in a statement of fact. As if on cue, the projector screen behind Franklin flickered to life. The placid blue was replaced by a slide, crisp and damning in corporate-approved sans-serif font. The title read, Employee Equity and Family Trust Disclosures. Below it was a complex flowchart of entities and accounts. Tessa seized the moment, her voice a smooth balm intended to soothe the sudden tension. There seems to be a system glitch, she said, gesturing vaguely at the screen. That slide wasn't meant for this presentation. It must have loaded the wrong deck. A lie, a clumsy, transparent lie. System glitch? On a presentation she, the CFO, personally oversaw? There are no accidents in a world of billion-dollar valuations. There is only intent. My hand rested on the table, seemingly relaxed. My thumb found the small, recessed button on the side of my watch. I pressed it once. A faint, haptic buzz confirmed the command. A digital marker was placed on the audio recording. 8:09 a.m. The moment a lie was officially entered into the record, the moment my evidence collection began in earnest. I let my eyes sweep across the faces around the table. A quick, forensic scan. I saw the entire ecosystem of corporate conspiracy in their gazes. There were 3 distinct species of observer in this room. First, the pitying. 2 junior VPs and a nervous analyst from marketing. They looked at me with a sort of sympathetic horror. They saw a lamb being led to the slaughter. Their expressions were soft, their discomfort genuine. They were irrelevant. Second, the calculating. Marcus Thorne and David Sterling. They were already 3 moves ahead, their minds racing. They weren't concerned with the ethics of a hidden trust fund. They were calculating risk, exposure, and potential fallout. How would this affect the company? How could it affect them? Their eyes were hard, emotionless chips of ice, weighing my reaction, judging my weakness. And third, the guilty, Tessa, and 2 of her senior finance deputies sitting beside her. Their fear was a palpable thing, a scent in the air like ozone before a storm. It wasn't pity or calculation in their eyes. It was the raw, primal terror of exposure. They weren't watching a drama. They were living the first moments of their own downfall. They knew what the slide meant. They knew what the question meant. They knew about the trust fund. And they knew I wasn't supposed to. They had all underestimated me. They saw the quiet niece, the diligent compliance officer who filed reports and followed the rules. They mistook my silence for weakness, my methodical nature for a lack of ambition. They never imagined I would have the audacity to use the tools of my own trade, compliance, documentation, the letter of the law, against them. A slow smile touched my lips, a mirror of my grandfather's, but stripped of all artifice. It was cold. It was a promise. Tessa saw it and flinched. I held her gaze for a beat longer, letting her see the abyss that had just opened up beneath her feet. I wanted her to understand that the game she had been playing was over. A new one was about to begin. My game. My rules. I wanted to say it out loud, to voice the thought that was now crystal clear in my mind. Thank you for the evidence. But I didn't. I swallowed the words, saving them for a more opportune moment. I simply nodded, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement, and turned my focus back to the projector screen. Committing every detail of the glitched slide to memory, the performance was over. The investigation had just begun. Back in my office on the 38th floor, the silence was a physical presence. The chaos of the boardroom felt a world away, separated by 2 flights of stairs and a universe of unspoken truths. My domain was a corner office, a glass box of perceived trust. From here, I could see the bronze plaque in the lobby courtyard, Mercer and Gray, founded 1948, a monument to my family's legacy, a legacy from which I had been surgically excised. Mercer and Gray loved its public image. We were the subject of a glowing feature in Forbes last year, a masterclass in corporate PR. The article lauded my grandfather, Franklin, for his modern approach to a family firm, praising his unflinching commitment to separating family dynamics from fiduciary duty. The journalist had gushed about our independent board and meritocratic hiring practices. It was a beautiful piece of fiction. The truth was that family was never separated from decisions. It was simply a weapon, wielded with a smile in the name of shareholder value. The firm wasn't a meritocracy. It was a monarchy hiding behind a corporate charter. I spun my chair to face the wall. Etched into the frosted glass partition, in elegant, minimalist script, was our corporate mantra. Transparency is our North Star. I saw it every time I walked out of the elevator. I saw it on our letterhead, in our annual reports, on the splash screen of our internal network. It was a lie so audacious, so pervasive, that it had almost become white noise, transparency, in a company that operated in shades of gray, where truths were buried in footnotes and liabilities were rephrased as opportunities. Our North Star wasn't transparency, it was plausible deniability. My arrival here, 3 years ago, had been orchestrated by Tessa herself. I remember the lunch at a painfully chic restaurant where the plates were large and the portions were small. She had leaned forward, her expression a careful construction of sisterly concern. "Ava, we need you," she'd said, her voice a low, confidential murmur. "You're the best at compliance. Your record at Sterling Lynch was impeccable. I need someone I can trust to keep us honest." Someone I can trust. At the time, I'd felt a flicker of hope, a chance to finally be part of the family business on my own terms, to prove my worth. I accepted, believing I could make a difference, what she'd meant. I now realized was someone I think I can control. She didn't hire me for my expertise. She hired me for my perceived meekness. She installed me as the watchdog, never imagining I would actually grow teeth. My first year was an education in corporate sanitation. I would submit a risk assessment report, flagged with bright, unmissable red warnings, a proposed acquisition with questionable accounting practices in its target, an investment vehicle with exposure to a volatile, unregulated market. My reports were detailed, factual, and legally sound. They would go up the chain to the executive committee, and a week later, they would come back down, neutered. My sharp, crimson flags of caution were consistently and skillfully diluted into a harmless, inoffensive beige. Significant legal exposure would be massaged into potential headwinds requiring strategic navigation. High probability of regulatory fines became a complex compliance landscape to be monitored. It was a masterclass in making problems disappear, not by solving them, but by renaming them. Throughout it all, my grandfather played his part to perfection. Franklin would sit in meetings, feigning a sort of dignified fatigue. Occasionally asking a question that seemed slightly off topic, he'd forget a name, or mix up the details of 2 different funds. The executive team, especially Tessa and Marcus Thorne, treated him with a cloying, patronizing reverence. They saw his supposed decline as an opportunity. This carefully cultivated opacity at the top allowed them to operate with impunity. "Franklin's not as sharp as he used to be," Tessa once confided in me, a dismissive wave of her hand. "We have to handle the details." They used his perceived weakness as a shield, a justification for the very culture of concealment I was hired to prevent. I watched them, and I watched him watch them, and I began to suspect his performance was just as calculated as theirs. The true currency of power within the firm wasn't money, it was equity. Specifically, a class of internal shares they called legacy units. These were never mentioned in public filings. They were the keys to the kingdom. granting immense voting power and a share of profits that dwarfed our official salaries. The distribution list was a secret, but I saw the effects. I saw how a handful of senior executives moved with an unshakable confidence, a certainty that they were insulated from the consequences that governed the rest of us. My name, of course, was never on that list. I wasn't legacy, I was labor. 6 months ago, a stray comment from a distant aunt at a family holiday about the trusts Franklin set up for all the grandchildren planted a seed of suspicion. It led me down a quiet, methodical rabbit hole. I initiated a formal, discreet inquiry through the proper channels, addressing it to HR and legal, citing standard personal financial planning. I asked for any documentation pertaining to trusts for which I was named as a beneficiary. The response came a week later, not from a person, but from an automated system, a single, sterile line of text in a system-generated email. No records on file. It was a digital door slammed in my face, cold, absolute, and a complete lie. This was the persona they had built for me, and the one I had learned to inhabit. In my performance reviews, the same words appeared again and again: reliable, thorough, discreet, a quiet achiever. They saw a diligent, slightly timid woman who was good with paperwork and kept to herself. They praised me for being trustworthy and low maintenance. They mistook my silence for acceptance, my patience for passivity, and in their arrogance, they gave me the perfect cover. They had no idea what I did after hours, when the cleaning crews were the only other souls on the floor. While they saw a quiet compliance officer, I was becoming a silent archivist of their sins. My work gave me access, not to everything, but to the seams of the organization, the digital cracks where the truth leaked out. I began my collection. It started with emails, every sanitized report, every dismissive reply from Tessa. I set up hidden filters to archive every communication that contained keywords like risk, adjustment, and legacy unit. Then I moved on to system logs. Using my administrative privileges, I began pulling access records for the secure financial data rooms. Who was logging in? And when? What files were they accessing? It was all there. A trail of digital breadcrumbs. I correlated those logs with keycard swipes. Tessa's card accessing the 40th floor at 2:03 a.m. on a Tuesday. Why? I cross-referenced that with the security camera footage from the hallway. A grainy but undeniable record of her entering the CFO's wing long after the building was empty. My evidence grew, file by encrypted file, stored on a series of solid-state drives kept in a safe deposit box 3 towns away. I had built a shadow archive of Mercer and Gray, a perfect, damning mirror to its polished public image. I was no longer just the head of compliance. I was the firm's chief historian, its sole, secret auditor. The politeness in this building, the endless corporate courtesy, the have a great day in the elevator, the let's circle back on that in a meeting, it was all a performance, a carefully maintained veneer to mask the brutal, transactional reality underneath. Everyone smiled, but no one was safe. Every conversation was a calculation, every favor a debt. That was the first lesson of survival here. The elaborate courtesy wasn't about kindness, it was a weapon, a silk scarf, wrapped elegantly around a rock, and they had just handed me the rock. The boardroom had emptied, but the echo of my grandfather's question remained, imprinted on the air. What trust fund? The words were a starting pistol. I returned to my office, the glass box on the 38th floor, and locked the door. The burnt coffee smell from the morning meeting still clung to my suit. I ignored it. My pulse was a low, steady drum. The shock had passed, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. This wasn't a hunt for a rumor. This was a compliance audit of my own life. My authority as head of compliance was my skeleton key. The corporate charter, which I had helped redraft, gave my office sweeping, independent audit rights over all company data rooms and digital archives for the purpose of regulatory and internal controls. It was a power Tessa and the board had granted me, believing I would only ever aim it outward, at outside threats. They never imagined I'd aim it at them. I logged into the system, my credentials opening the encrypted gateways. I wasn't in the shallow end of the company servers, the shared drives and marketing folders. I was in the data room, the digital vault where the firm's deepest secrets were interred: merger agreements, high-level compensation structures, and private family holding documents. It was a digital fortress, and I was one of the few guards with a master key. My search was targeted. I didn't look for trust fund. I looked for my name, Ava Mercer. The system returned hundreds of results: employment contracts, HR reviews, compliance reports I had authored. It was all noise. I narrowed the search. Beneficiary, A. Mercer. The system paused, then returned a single, buried file. It wasn't in a finance folder. It was in a legacy archive, miscategorized under estate planning, obsolete. A deliberate act of misfiling. The file was named RVNTR Sked C. My fingers hovered over the mouse. This was it. I clicked. The document was a simple PDF scan. The Raven Trust. It was titled Schedule C, Beneficiary Declarations. My eyes scanned the dense legal text until they found the line item: Primary Beneficiary, A. Mercer. A. Mercer. It was me, but it was too easy. If this was here, why the no records on file email? Why the public ambush by my grandfather? I didn't look at the document's contents. Not yet. I looked at its history. In my world, the metadata tells the real story. I right-clicked, opening the file's property logs, the digital ledger of every time it had been touched, viewed, or altered. And there it was. A log entry from 3 months ago, February 14th, 2:03 a.m., a modify action. User, T. Caro admin asked, Tessa's executive assistant, the same time, to the minute, that my hallway security camera log showed Tessa's keycard accessing the finance wing. Her assistant was the proxy, the digital cutout, but Tessa was the one in the room, directing the stroke. I opened the version history, placing the current file side by side with the one from before that 2:03 a.m. modification. In the original, the beneficiary line was clear: Ava Mercer. In the modified version, the one I had just found, it read A. Mercer. A single keystroke, the deletion of an A, the addition of an R, a typo, a simple, plausible, deniable typo that would cause any digital search for Ava Mercer to fail. It was sloppy, arrogant, and brilliant. It was the digital equivalent of burying a body in plain sight. They hadn't deleted the file. They had just changed the name on the tombstone. Now, I read the document. My blood ran cold, not with fear, but with a chilling, electric clarity. I skipped past the financial jargon, the allocation of assets, until I found Section 7, Conditions of Disbursement. The clause was intricate. It stipulated that if the primary beneficiary, Ava Mercer, did not receive full and formal disclosure of the trust's existence by her 32nd birthday, the principal, $340,000, would not revert. It would convert. It would be transformed from cash into a block of temporary, high-yield voting shares in Mercer and Gray. And where would those shares go? I read the next line. Said shares shall be automatically remanded to and absorbed by the Founders Voting Trust. The Founders Trust, my grandfather's private holding, the entity that gave him absolute control over the company. My first thought was a surge of betrayal. He was using me. This whole thing, the ambush in the boardroom, was a game for him to consolidate his own power, using my inheritance as a pawn. He was testing his board, yes, but he was also set to profit from their corruption. But that didn't feel right. The man who taught me to play chess never made a move that simple. I kept reading, digging deeper into the subsections, the footnotes, the places where the real poison is hidden. I found it in Section 7C, a single paragraph titled Override Provision. The text was dense, but the meaning was unmistakable. If the beneficiary could provide irrefutable public proof that the lack of disclosure was not an oversight, but an act of intentional, malicious, or grossly negligent concealment by an officer of the firm. Then Section 7B was rendered null and void. In that event, the entire block of converted voting shares would be transferred directly to the beneficiary. My breath hitched, but there was more. Furthermore, a penalty vote, equivalent to 12% of the total founder's voting trust, shall be immediately and irrevocably transferred to the beneficiary, granting said beneficiary proxy control over that portion for a period of no less than 60 months. I had to read it twice to understand the scale of it. This wasn't a key to a safe. This was the blueprint for a bomb. My grandfather hadn't just set a trap for Tessa. He had created a weapon for me. He was offering me my $3.4 million. Yes, but he was also offering me something infinitely more valuable. Power. Enough power to wound her. Enough power to tip the scales of the entire company. Now I had the what, the altered file, and the who, Tessa's proxy. I needed the how. How did they prove I never received disclosure? The no records on file email was passive. I needed something active. I needed the smoking gun. I used my root-level compliance access to get into the company's email exchange server. I went past the user-facing inboxes and into the transport layer, the SMTP gateway logs. This is where the digital mail carriers report their routes. I ran a query for all automated notifications sent from the trust's third-party legal administrator, directed to my email address, mercer@mercergray.com, for the past year. The system returned a log, one email, sent on my 31st birthday, and beside it, a status code, 550 blocked. It hadn't just been lost or spammed, it had been actively refused by our server. I dug deeper, into the firewall and filter rules. It took me 20 minutes, but I found it. A custom-created rule, buried deep in the server's rule set to apply only to my specific email address. The rule was programmed to identify any incoming mail with keywords trust, beneficiary, or Raven, and instantly delete it before it ever reached my inbox. The name of the filter rule, input by the admin who created it, family notice, suppressed. They had put it in writing. They were so arrogant, so certain no one would ever look, that they labeled their crime. My hands were perfectly steady. I began the harvest. I exported the SMTP gateway log. I exported the firewall filter rule. I exported the data room files, metadata, and version history. I packaged them with the encrypted audio file from the 8:09 a.m. boardroom meeting. Tessa's system glitch lie. I didn't save them to my hard drive. I opened a secure connection to Notary Chain, a blockchain-based digital notary service. I uploaded the entire bundle. With a click, the platform hashed every file, timestamped them, and sealed them onto a permanent, distributed ledger. My evidence was now immutable, tamper-proof, and legally indisputable. The digital key was forged. I leaned back in my chair. My first instinct was to call my lawyer, but an outside lawyer would file an injunction, start a lawsuit. That was a war of attrition, fought with billable hours and discovery motions. It would take years, and the override clause demanded public proof. A courtroom was a private stage. I needed a public one. I didn't need a lawyer. I needed a co-conspirator. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the 4-digit internal extension for the founder's office, the line that bypassed his assistant. He picked up on the second ring. No hello, just silence, waiting. "Franklin," I said, my voice low and even. "It's Ava. I'm in." There was a pause. I heard the faint, papery rustle of his breath, then a short, dry cough. When his voice came, it was not the frail, forgetful old man from the boardroom. It was the predator, the chess master. "Good," he said. "Keep going." He hung up. I sat in the silence, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The game was on. The invitation arrived not as a calendar request, but as an instant message at 5:17 p.m. Just as the office was beginning to bleed out for the day, Tessa Caro. You, me, Stonebrook Grill, 8 p.m., We need a sisterly chat. It wasn't a request. It was a summons, wrapped in the flimsy gauze of family. Stonebrook Grill, the most expensive, ostentatiously power restaurant in Norcrest Vale. It was where executives celebrated billion-dollar acquisitions and fired senior partners over $400 entrees. It was a stage, just like the boardroom, and Tessa had just set the scene. I arrived at 7:58 p.m. The restaurant was a symphony of dark wood, low lighting, and hushed, important conversations. The hostess, already informed of my arrival, glided me to a secluded corner booth. Tessa was already there, a glass of pale Sancerre in her hand, looking every bit the part of the CFO in charge. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of money. "Ava," she smiled, a tight, polished gesture that didn't involve her eyes. "You made it. Drink?" "Water, still," I said. The small talk was excruciating. She asked about my apartment, my non-existent social life, the performance of the compliance department. It was a data-gathering exercise disguised as concern. I gave her nothing. I was the gray rock, the dull, uninteresting surface she had always believed me to be. I was reliable, quiet, thorough. I was the one who processed the paperwork, not the one who created it. We ate. The food was exquisite, technical, and joyless. Each bite tasted of calculation. Finally, after we both declined dessert, the true purpose of the meeting arrived. A waiter, moving with reverent silence, placed a small, leather-bound portfolio on the table. Tessa didn't open it. She just nudged it toward me. I looked inside. The total was $2,700 for 2 people, 2 main courses, 1 appetizer, and her 3 glasses of wine. It was an obscene amount, a caricature of corporate excess. "Don't look so shocked, Ava," Tessa said, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. She leaned back, the picture of magnanimity. "Consider it a family expense." My heart gave a single, hard thump. Family expense. She was deliberately, arrogantly, blurring the line. She was testing me, seeing if I could be bought, or at least intimidated, by the sheer scale of the wealth she commanded. I took out my phone. My movements were slow, deliberate. I angled the phone over the bill. The app I used wasn't just a camera. It was an evidence capture tool that watermarked every image with an unalterable timestamp and GPS coordinates. Click, the screen flashed. 8:41 p.m. As the light from my phone hit the bill, I glanced up. Just as I'd suspected, a small, dark dome in the ceiling molding, directly above our table, a high-resolution security camera. Standard for a place that handled this much money and this many secrets, it would have a microphone. 2. I had its angle. I had its attention. Tessa's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing on my phone. "What are you doing?" "Documenting," I said, my voice flat. "For my records." The sisterly pretense evaporated. The air in the booth turned frigid. She leaned in, her voice no longer a murmur, but a hiss, sharp and venomous, meant only for me. "Stop it, Ava. Stop digging about the trust. You have a good job, a very good, very secure job. Don't be stupid and throw it all away for some fantasy." There it was, the threat, the quiet, corporate shiv. Be a good girl, stay in your box, forget the money we stole from you. I leaned in, closing the distance between us until we were breathing the same pressurized air. My voice was just as quiet, but it was not a hiss, it was a blade of ice. "Is that what this is? A warning?" I didn't wait for an answer. "Speaking of digging, have you blocked any other emails intended for me, Tessa, or just the business ones?" Her mouth froze, literally. She had been in the process of forming a word, and it just stopped. The blood drained from her face, leaving her makeup sitting like a mask on pale skin. Her eyes, for the first time, showed not calculation, not arrogance, but pure, unfiltered panic. She knew. She knew I knew. I had just confirmed her worst fear. Before she could recover, a new figure appeared at our table, a sommelier, holding a bottle of deep red wine with a label I recognized as costing at least $1,000. "Excuse me, Ms. Caro," the sommelier said. "The bottle of 1998 Harlan Estate you requested. Shall I decant?" Tessa, still reeling, just waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, just leave it." "Very good, ma'am. I've charged it to the company account, as instructed." He set the bottle down and bowed slightly. "Charged to the company account." I looked at the bottle, then at Tessa. Her panic was now being eclipsed by a rising tide of fury. She had been caught, and her response was to double down, to flaunt her power, to use the company's money to buy a celebratory bottle of wine after threatening me. The waiter who had brought the bill returned, his eyes flicking nervously between us. Sensing the sudden drop in temperature, "Ma'am, the bill." Tessa was about to reach for it, about to sign her name, to bury this $2,700 family expense in a corporate budget code, but I was faster. I took my personal credit card, my simple, non-corporate, consumer-grade Amex, and slotted it firmly into the leather portfolio. "I'll be paying for this," I said. Tessa's head snapped toward me. "What? Don't be ridiculous. The firm is covering it." "No," I said, making eye contact with the waiter. He looked terrified. "I'm paying the entire amount on this card." I pushed the portfolio toward him, "and I need a receipt." The waiter hesitated, looking to Tessa as his true north. "But, ma'am, Ms. Caro's account?" I cut him off, my voice clear and firm, loud enough for the microphone in the ceiling. "This was a personal dinner. It was not a business expense. Please confirm for me that you are processing this as a non-business, personal transaction." The poor man just wanted to escape. Yes, ma'am. A personal dinner. Right away." He snatched the portfolio and vanished. The silence that descended was absolute. Tessa stared at me, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, confusion, rage, and a dawning, horrifying realization that she had been comprehensively outplayed. She had tried to trap me, to implicate me in her casual corruption. Instead, she had handed me a weapon. She had tried to buy my silence with a $2,700 dinner, and in doing so, she had just provided me with ironclad, time-stamped, audio-video proof that she was abusing her position as CFO. She used corporate funds, General Ledger Code 5630, client entertainment, I knew it by heart, to intimidate a fellow employee over a personal family matter. It was a bright-line violation. It was an act of fraud. And I had the receipt. The waiter returned, his hand shaking slightly as he placed the portfolio and my card back on the table. "Your receipt, Mademoiselle." I signed my name. I took my copy. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Tessa's voice was a low growl. "Where do you think you're going?" "Home," I said. I looked down at her, at the $1,000 bottle of wine she had just illegally expensed, at the sister who had tried to bury me. "I don't do quiet, Tessa. I thought you knew that." I left her sitting there, alone in the booth, with the wine and the bill she hadn't paid. I walked out of the restaurant, the cool night air hitting my face like a blessing. I didn't look back. I walked 2 blocks, turned the corner, and pulled out my phone. The 8:41 p.m. time-stamped photo of the bill was already syncing to my secure cloud. The audio recording from my watch was uploading. The trap hadn't been for me. It had been for her, and she had walked right into it. I opened a secure message to the one number I knew was waiting. "The trap is set." I hit send. A block away, a bus hissed to a stop. I got on. Monday morning arrived with the chill of a coming storm. The office was a sea of forced pleasantries. The tension from Friday's board meeting a dangerous undercurrent no one dared acknowledge. Tessa avoided me, her eyes like chips of flint whenever our paths nearly crossed. She was wounded and cornered, which made her more dangerous than ever. I spent the morning in my office, door closed, reviewing the digital evidence from the Stonebrook Grill, integrating it into the larger mosaic of deceit I had been building. At 10:15 a.m., the call came, not from his assistant, but from Franklin himself. His voice on the line was the frail, slightly reedy one he used for his public performances. "Ava, my office, now," a click, and the line was dead. I walked the 2 flights up to the 40th floor. The executive wing was hushed, the carpet so thick it seemed to absorb sound. Franklin's office was at the very end, a vast space of mahogany and leather that smelled of old books and power. He wasn't behind his desk. He was standing by the window, looking down at the city he had built. He turned as I entered, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked tired, older than he had on Friday. The performance was back in place. He held a simple, plain manila envelope in his hand. It had no markings, no address. "Ava," he said, his voice a low murmur. He didn't offer a seat. He simply extended the envelope. "Take this." I took it. The paper felt thin, the contents light, a few sheets of paper at most. "Do not open it here," he commanded, his eyes holding mine. "Go to the archive room, the physical archive on the sublevel. Open it there, alone." The physical archive. It was a place no one went anymore. A temperature-controlled crypt on the building's lowest level, filled with rows upon rows of bankers' boxes containing the company's paper history from before the digital age. It was a tomb of forgotten facts, a perfect place to learn a secret. "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded, a curt dismissal, and turned back to the window. I left without another word. The elevator ride down to the sublevel felt like a descent into the past. The air grew cooler, the polished marble of the lobby giving way to bare, polished concrete. The archive room was protected by a heavy steel door with a keypad lock. I entered the code, a code only myself, the head of IT, and Franklin knew, and stepped inside. The room smelled of aged paper and binding glue. It was silent, save for the low hum of the climate control system. Rows of towering metal shelves stretched into the dim light, each one laden with identical white boxes labeled with dates and codes. I walked to the small reading station in the center of the room, a simple metal desk with a single lamp and an old offline computer terminal. I sat down and placed the envelope on the desk. My hands were steady as I opened the clasp. Inside, there was no will, no dense legal document. There was only a small black USB flash drive and a single sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery, folded in half, bearing my grandfather's monogram. I picked up the USB drive first. It felt inert, a simple piece of plastic and metal. I plugged it into the terminal. The old machine whirred to life. Recognizing the device, a single file appeared on the screen. For Ava, MP4. I put on the headphones that were coiled beside the monitor and double-clicked the file. The screen flickered, and then Franklin's face filled the frame. But this was not the man from the office upstairs. This was not the enfeebled patriarch from the boardroom. The man on the screen was sharp, his eyes clear and piercing. He was sitting in his study at home, a fire crackling in the hearth behind him. The video was dated 1 year ago. To the day, he looked directly into the camera, as if he were looking directly at me, across time. "Hello? Ava," he began. His voice was strong, resonant, stripped of any pretense of frailty. "If you are watching this, it means 2 things. First, that I am likely no longer in a position to tell you this myself, and second, that you have found the Raven Trust." A pause. He let the words sink in. "It means you are as smart as I always believed you to be, and it means the people I entrusted with my legacy have failed a critical test." He leaned forward slightly. "I built Mercer and Gray from nothing. Ava, I built it on risk, but also on honor. As I've gotten older, I've watched a different ethos creep in, a culture of soft lies and quiet entitlement, championed by people who believe they are smarter than the rules, people like your stepsister." He didn't say her name with anger. He said it with the cold disappointment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "I could have just given you the money," he continued. "It would have been simpler, but the money was never the point. The trust was a test, a crucible. Its clauses were designed to reveal character. Anyone who tried to conceal it from you for their own gain would expose themselves as greedy and foolish. They would be so focused on the cash. They wouldn't see the true power hidden in the fine print. He was talking about the override clause. He was confirming everything. But the test was for you, too, he said, his gaze intensifying. I had to know what you would do when you found it. Would you make a scene? Would you run to a lawyer and start a messy, public family feud that would drag the company's name through the mud? Would you fight with emotion? Or would you use the system itself? Would you be the compliance officer I know you are? Would you gather the evidence, document the crime, and use their own rules against them, with precision and without mercy? He smiled then, a thin, wolfish grin. I raised you on chess. Ava, you do not win by flipping the board over. You win by trapping the queen. This firm, this family, they have rules. Some are written, some are not. Your enemies believe they can bend them. I am giving you the tool to break them. His face grew serious again. You will be tempted to act quickly, to show them your proof. Do not. This is not about one victory. It is about the entire war. There is a time for evidence and a time for silence. You must choose your moment with absolute precision. He leaned so close to the camera, I could see the flecks of gold in his irises. Pick the law, he said, his voice a low command. Then pick the moment. The video ended. The screen went black. I sat in the humming silence of the archive, my grandfather's words echoing in my ears. The man I knew, the fading patriarch, was a ghost, a role he was playing. The real Franklin Mercer was a ruthless strategist, and he was still in complete control. He hadn't been weakened by age. He had weaponized it, using it as a cloak to observe his enemies and arm his allies. My hand was not shaking as I reached for the folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was a handwritten note, in his familiar, sharp cursive. Ava. The video explains the game. This note explains the prize. The override clause is your sword. If you can prove they hid the trust from you intentionally, you have the right to claim the voting rights. Not just some, all of them. The trust was designed so that their greed would forge your weapon. Do not hesitate to wield it. Film. Below his signature was a formal, embossed stamp and a looping signature. A notary public. I looked closer at the stamp. The name was legitimate, but the town listed below it was Everlyn Crest. I almost laughed. Everlyn Crest didn't exist. It was a fictional town from a series of detective novels Franklin and I used to read when I was a child. It was a code, a private signal between him and me, confirming the authenticity of this strange, off-the-books directive. This wasn't a legal document meant for a court. It was a battle plan. It was his final, explicit permission to do what was necessary. I folded the note and put it, along with the USB drive, into my pocket. I stood up and walked out of the archive room, locking the heavy door behind me. The cold weight of the drive against my leg was a constant reminder. As I rode the elevator back up to the world of glass and steel, the pieces of the puzzle rearranged themselves in my mind into a single, terrifyingly clear picture. My grandfather wasn't testing his board. He was purging it. He had built this elaborate, high-stakes game not just to give me my inheritance, but to see if I was worthy of a much greater one. He wasn't handing me a check. He was handing me a crown and telling me to go and take it. He had picked the law. Now, I had to pick the moment. The day after I visited the archive, the day after the dinner trap, I was no longer a compliance officer. I was a strategist. Franklin's video had changed the mission. It was no longer a passive investigation. It was an active campaign. He had told me to pick the law, then pick the moment. The moment was Wednesday's extraordinary shareholder meeting, called by Franklin himself. The 2 days before it were my time to pick the law. I had to build the cage. My first move, at 9 a.m., Tuesday, was not a secret. It was an official, firm-wide memo from the Office of Compliance. The subject line was cold, sterile, and designed to induce panic. Urgent. Mandatory 90-day audit of T&E reimbursements. GL 5630, Client Entertainment. The memo was a masterpiece of corporate ambiguity. It cited recent internal control flags and a need to tighten protocols in preparation for year-end SEC filings. It announced a comprehensive review of all expenses filed under the Client Entertainment Code in the last quarter. It was a net, cast wide to catch one specific fish. Tessa would see it. She would know it was me. She would know it was about the $2,700 Stonebrook dinner she had undoubtedly expensed. But she couldn't stop it. A CFO blocking a routine compliance audit is an admission of guilt. I had just locked her in a room with a ticking bomb. My second move was quieter. I sent a formal request to the head of physical security, copying the head of IT. The justification was pure, impenetrable jargon. Cross-referencing digital access logs for a pending data integrity review, as per SEC Rule 17A4. The request was surgically precise. A full keycard entry and internal access log for the 40th floor executive wing, specifically all doors accessing the CFO suite. Timeframe: February 13th, 10:12 p.m. to February 14th, 6:12 a.m. I already had this information from my own digging. I had the grainy camera footage of Tessa walking down the hall. But this request was different. This was not discovery. This was performance. This move forced the company to officially produce the evidence against itself. It took the data from my private, locked files and placed it onto the official record. I was building the case within the system, using their own procedures. My third move was to secure my place on the stage. Franklin had set the meeting. I had to claim my time. I emailed the corporate secretary, a man who answered only to the board. Subject: Speaker registration. Extraordinary meeting, Octo 22. The body was brief. Please register Ava Mercer, Head of Compliance, for a 6-minute presentation to address Item 3, Corporate Governance and Internal Controls. 6 minutes, not 5, not 10, 6. It implied precision. It was the exact amount of time I needed to deploy the evidence, play the video, and read the override clause. It signaled that I was not there to argue. I was there to present a finding. My fourth move was the steel fist. At 10:15 a.m., I sent a formal litigation hold notice to the entire CFO division. I included Tessa, her executive assistant, and the 2 finance deputies whose fear I had seen in the boardroom. The language was brutal, legal, and absolute. You are hereby instructed to preserve all documents, data, and communications, including emails, drafts, voicemails, and personal notes related to employee equity disclosures, Raven Trust, and T&E expense processing, GL 5630. This hold is effective immediately. I concluded with the standard legal threat. Failure to comply may result in disciplinary action and personal legal exposure. I attached a simple, lawful read receipt tracker to the message, a single, invisible pixel that would ping my server when the email was opened. The pings came back almost instantly. Tessa Caro, opened 10:15:32 a.m. T. Caro admin asked, opened 10:16:01 a.m. They were now legally forbidden from deleting the evidence. I had just frozen the crime scene, with them trapped inside it. My fifth move was a human one. I left my office and walked to the 40th floor, to the office of David Sterling, our general counsel, the man who had dropped his pen. He was the firm's legal shield. I needed to know if he was shielding the company or shielding Tessa. I didn't knock. I walked in, and he looked up from his desk, his face pale and drawn. "Ava," he said, his voice strained. I closed the door. "David." I didn't sit. I stood over his desk. "The litigation hold is active. The audit is in progress. I have uncovered a systematic, malicious conspiracy to defraud a beneficiary and misuse corporate funds at the highest level." He winced. "Ava, these are serious, family matters. We should handle this internally, quietly." It stopped being a family matter when Tessa's proxy logged in at 2:03 a.m. and falsified a legal trust document. I said. His eyes widened. He hadn't known I had that. It stopped being a family matter when she used a corporate card to pay for a dinner where she threatened my job. I have the receipt. I have the server logs. I have the video. Video? He whispered. You have a choice, David, I said, my voice low and cold. You are the general counsel. Your duty is to this firm and its shareholders, not to my stepsister. Tomorrow morning, when I present my findings, you will have to make a decision. You can recommend the board adopt my findings, or you can try to defend the cover-up. I leaned in. One of those paths allows you to keep your job. The other names you as a co-conspirator. You have until 9:00 a.m. I left his office. I didn't need his answer. His actions in the meeting would be his answer. The rest of Tuesday was for final verifications. I opened a secure portal to our external auditors. Price Waterhouse. I uploaded a single file, the high-resolution time-stamped image of the 2700 Stonebrook Grill receipt, the one I had paid with my personal American Express card. My note was simple. Atienne, Senior Audit Partner. Please cross-reference this receipt against T&E reimbursement submissions from CFO Tessa Caro for the same date. Oste 19. This is part of the ongoing 90-day internal audit. Urgent. I was handing them the gun and the bullet when they found Tessa's reimbursement claim for the same meal, which she would have filed to cover her tracks. An independent, external party would be the one to officially flag her for fraud. Next, I reopened the SMTP gateway logs. I had the filter rule. Family notice. Suppressed. Now I needed its author. I traced the filter's creation credentials. It was created by admin user 04. I ran that user ID against the IT authorization logs. Admin user 04 was a high-privilege account permanently assigned to Tessa's executive assistant, the same assistant whose user ID had been used to log in at 2:03 a.m. to change Mercer to Marcer. It was a perfect closed loop. The same hand held both knives. But I needed one final piece. I had to prove Tessa knew the trust existed. My no records email proved I didn't, but I had to prove she did. I ran a new search, not for emails to me, but emails about the Raven Trust to anyone at Mercer and Gray. A single hit, a digital carbon copy, the original disclosure notice, the one that had been blocked from my inbox, had also been sent, as per standard legal protocol, to the head of the relevant financial division for oversight. The recipient list was right there, in the server logs. To A. Mercer at mercergray.com, status, 550, blocked by rule, family notice, suppressed. CC, T. Caro at mercergray.com, status, 250 reverse. My heart hammered. She got the email. She received the full disclosure. She saw the $3.4 million, knew it was mine, and then methodically, over a period of months, built the digital wall to hide it, culminating in the 2:03 a.m. typo. She knew it all. This was the final piece of evidence. This proved intentional, malicious concealment. This triggered Section 7C. This triggered the override. My last move of the day. I took the black USB drive from my pocket. I accessed the secure presentation vault for the shareholder meeting. I uploaded the 4AVA MP4 file. I retitled it FMA Contingency Governance. I embedded it as slide 4 in my 6-minute deck. It was set to play on click. I would be the one to press the button. I would be the one to raise the ghost. The net was set. The evidence was logged, notarized, and loaded. The players were cornered. I went home. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, rehearsing my 6 minutes, the words like cold stones in my mouth. Wednesday, 9:14 a.m. I was in the front row of the Norcrest Pavilion Auditorium. The CEO was at the podium, droning on about quarterly projections. I looked at Tessa. 3 seats down. She was pale, but composed. She thought this was a fight she could win with politics. She didn't realize it was a trial she had already lost. I looked down at my watch. My timer buzzed softly. My agenda item was next. Showtime. The Norcrest Pavilion was not a boardroom. It was an arena, a cavernous, tiered auditorium designed to impress, with seating for 200, acoustics engineered for gravitas, and a massive LED screen that bathed everything in a cold, corporate blue. This was where the company performed its power for the world, where it projected strength to its investors. Today, it would be the stage for a public execution. The shareholders, a mix of institutional investors in severe suits and old family money retirees, settled into their seats with polite murmurs. On the dais, the executive team sat like a royal court, Tessa at the center, radiating a brittle, hard-won confidence. She had survived the last few days. She thought the storm had passed. She stood to open the meeting. Her voice was smooth, practiced, every syllable polished. "Good morning. In a challenging quarter, our firm has demonstrated remarkable resilience." She spoke of synergy, of forward-looking strategy, of stakeholder value. She concluded with the ultimate corporate platitude, her eyes sweeping the room with manufactured sincerity. "We have faced headwinds, but we have faced them together, because at Mercer and Gray, we know we are stronger together." A wave of polite, obligatory applause rippled through the room. The corporate secretary, a man with a face like parchment, stepped to the lectern. "We now move to item 3, a presentation on corporate governance by Ms. Ava Mercer, Head of Compliance." A low murmur went through the crowd. The head of compliance was not a role that usually commanded the spotlight. I walked from the front row to the stage, my heels making sharp, distinct clicks on the polished floor. Each step was a metronome, counting down the seconds of Tessa's career. I adjusted the microphone, my eyes finding Tessa's. Her expression was a mask of detached curiosity, but I could see the frantic pulse beating in her neck. "Good morning," I said. My voice was amplified, filling the space, calm and clear. "My presentation will last 6 minutes." On the massive screen behind me, a digital clock appeared. 0600. It began to tick down. As head of compliance, my duty is to protect the integrity of this firm and the interests of its shareholders. Today, I am here to report a catastrophic failure of that integrity at the highest level. I clicked the remote in my hand. Slide 1. The screen changed. It was a simple, brutal timeline. The title: Raven Trust, Beneficiary Suppression. On the left, a date, February 14th. In the center, a timestamp, 2:03 a.m. On the right, a log entry, file RVNTR SCED-C modified, beneficiary name altered, Mercer to Marcer. "On this date," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "a legal trust document was digitally altered to effectively erase the name of its primary beneficiary, preventing them from being notified of a multi-million-dollar inheritance." I saw Tessa's knuckles turn white where she gripped the edge of the table. Click. Slide 2. A new graphic filled the screen, a flowchart of the company's email server. The beneficiary's disclosure was further suppressed via a custom-built email filter, programmed to block all communication regarding the trust. I pointed the laser dot on the remote to a box on the screen. The filter, named Family Notice, Suppressed, was created using the credentials of a senior admin account assigned to the office of the CFO. I let that hang in the air for a moment. The IT logs show that the two-factor authentication code for that account at the time of the filter's creation was sent to, and approved by, a mobile device registered to our chief financial officer, Tessa Caro. A gasp rippled through the front rows. Tessa did not move. She was a statue of ice. Click. Slide 3. The screen now showed 2 documents side by side. On the left, the itemized bill from Stonebrook Grill for $2,700. On the right, an expense reimbursement form, submitted by Tessa Caro. The amount, $2,700, was coded to General Ledger, 5630, Client Entertainment. This suppression of information was part of a larger pattern of abuse of authority. This is a reimbursement claim for a client dinner on October 19th. The client, according to the filing, was me. I paused. However, the dinner was not for business. It was a personal meeting during which Ms. Caro used her position to threaten my employment in an attempt to halt my investigation into the trust. I lifted my hand, and a new element appeared on the screen, an audio waveform. According to the restaurant's security recordings from 8:41 p.m. and my own legally recorded documentation, the nature of the dinner was made explicitly clear. I pressed a button. My own voice, crisp and clear, filled the auditorium. This was a personal dinner. It was not a business expense. The audio cut out. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I had just publicly accused the CFO of fraud, witness tampering, and embezzlement. Tessa was on her feet. This is an outrageous, unsubstantiated attack, a private family matter. It stopped being a family matter at 2:03 a.m. I cut her off, my voice sharp as glass. And as for unsubstantiated, click. Slide 4. The screen went black for a second, and then Franklin Mercer's face filled the giant display. He was not the frail man they knew. He was vital, sharp, his eyes burning with a cold fire. The entire auditorium held its breath. It was like watching a ghost materialize. He looked directly into the camera, into the heart of the room. The Raven Trust was a crucible, he said, his voice resonating with its old power. Designed to reveal character, I knew someone would be tempted by the money. I knew they would try to hide it, to bury it, to steal it in the dead of night. They would think they were stealing from a grandchild. He leaned in, his gaze a physical force. But they were stealing from me, and there are consequences. The room was dead silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The trust contains a provision, Franklin's voice boomed, an override, for the one I knew would be smart enough to follow the rules, to find the truth, and to use it not for revenge, but for justice. His eyes seemed to find mine from across time. If she finds the truth, he declared, each word a hammer blow. She owns the votes you tried to bury. The video ended. The screen went black. I stepped forward, back into the spotlight. I looked past the executive dais, to the shareholders. My voice was steady, imbued with the authority Franklin had just bestowed upon me. The evidence is clear. The act of intentional malicious concealment has been proven. The threshold of the override provision in Section 7, subsection C, has been met. I took a deep breath. Pursuant to the explicit legally notarized terms of the Raven Trust, I am exercising that provision, effective immediately. I claim full proxy control over the converted voting shares, and the additional 12% penalty vote as stipulated. Tessa was sputtering, her composure shattered. This is insane. A video? A fictional clause? The notary? Click. The final slide. The screen lit up one last time. It was a high-resolution scan of the Trust's signature page. Section 7C was highlighted in yellow, and beside it, my grandfather's signature, and below that, magnified to fill a third of the screen, was the notary's seal. The looping signature was clear. The embossed stamp was perfect, and the location, in crisp, undeniable print, read, Everlyn Crest. To the shareholders, it was just a name. To David Sterling, whose face had gone the color of ash, it was a legal anomaly. To Tessa, it was gibberish. To my grandfather, watching from whatever private feed he had arranged, it was the checkmate he had taught me to deliver. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. The clock on the screen showed 004. 4 seconds left. I didn't need them. The work was done. The silence was my applause. It was the sound of a dynasty cracking, the sound of power shifting irrevocably in the space of 356 seconds. The silence in the Norcrest Pavilion was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. My final slide, with its arcane, notarized seal from a fictional town, hung on the screen like a verdict. The 200 shareholders in the room were no longer a passive audience. They were a jury, and I had just rested my case. Tessa stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. the denial she had been about to voice dying on her lips. Marcus Thorne, the CEO, stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen, as if trying to will the image away through sheer force of his disbelief. The first to break the paralysis was the corporate secretary. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound amplified by the microphone. "There appears to be an irregularity." He looked helplessly toward the executive dais, his eyes landing on David Sterling, the general counsel. He was looking for a life raft. But before Sterling could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. It came from the front row, from a man who had not yet spoken. He was Arthur Vance, a senior partner at the law firm that had represented the Mercer family trusts for 50 years. He was old school, his suit immaculate, his face a roadmap of boardroom battles won and lost. Franklin had, I realized, placed a rook on the board I hadn't even seen. Vance stood slowly, commanding the room's attention. "Mr. Secretary," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, "there is no irregularity. My firm is the independent administrator of the Raven Trust. I have a certified copy of the full document right here." He lifted a leather-bound folio. "The provision Ms. Mercer has cited, Section 7, subsection C, is quite real, and its conditions are explicit." He opened the folio and read, his voice resonating with the weight of law. "The override provision is triggered upon the presentation of irrefutable public proof of intentional suppression by an officer of the firm." He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the silent shareholders. "The evidence presented by Ms. Mercer, the altered file, the server logs, the fraudulent expense claim, and the sworn video testimony of the trust's grantor, Franklin Mercer, more than satisfies that burden of proof. The override is, as of this moment, in effect." A shockwave, visible and audible, passed through the auditorium. This was no longer a family squabble. It was a legally executed transfer of power. The corporate secretary, now on steadier ground, nodded. "Very well. In light of this development, we must proceed to an immediate confirmation vote on the current board resolutions." He was trying to stick to the script, to maintain a semblance of normalcy. "I have a new resolution," I said, my voice cutting him off. The microphone was still mine. All eyes snapped back to me. "I move for an immediate vote on the following 3 points." On the screen behind me, the slide of the trust document was replaced with crisp, black text. "Motion to resolve. 1. The immediate suspension, pending investigation, of CFO Tessa Caro for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and violations of the Corporate Code of Conduct. 2. The formation of a special committee, reporting directly to the board, to conduct a full independent investigation into the matters presented today. 3. The immediate appointment of an external, independent auditor to review all executive expense accounts for the past 24 months. It was a decapitation strike, phrased in the bloodless language of corporate governance. "We will now vote," I declared. "This is a registered shareholder vote. Please use the electronic terminals at your seats. The resolution requires a simple majority." The screen changed again, now showing a simple bar chart, in favor and against. Both were at 0. In the front row, I saw an old man, one of Franklin's original partners from the 1960s, pull out his phone. On the screen, I could just make out a live video feed. A man in a study, watching intently. The man raised a glass in a silent toast. My grandfather was watching. He saw his checkmate. The voting began. The against bar ticked up first. I saw Tessa's finance deputies and a few allied board members frantically tapping at their screens. It climbed to 15%, then 20%. Then my votes landed. The system processed the transfer of the Raven Trust shares, plus the 12% penalty slice of the Founders Trust. The in-favor bar didn't just climb, it exploded. It shot up the screen in a single, vertical blue line, blowing past the 50% threshold in a fraction of a second. It settled at 58%. The room erupted in a chaotic cacophony of shouts, whispers, and the frantic tapping of fingers on phones. The visual was undeniable. The math was absolute. I had a controlling interest. I had the majority. All eyes turned to the dais, to the leaders who had just been rendered powerless. David Sterling, the general counsel, was the first to break. He had weighed his options. He had chosen survival. He leaned toward his microphone, his face grim. "Given the verifiable legal standing of the trust's override provision," he said, each word tasting like ash, "and in the interest of stabilizing this firm and mitigating further legal exposure, this council recommends the immediate adoption of Miss Mercer's resolution." The first domino had fallen. Next was Marcus Thorne, the CEO. A sheen of sweat was visible on his forehead, even under the cool stage lights. He saw his world crumbling. His power was derived from the board's consent, and the board's consent was now sitting in my pocket. He tried to project calm, but his voice was strained. "For the stability of the firm, to ensure a smooth transition and maintain market confidence, I concur with counsel. We must move forward." The second domino fell. Now there was only one left standing, Tessa. Her face was a mask of furious disbelief. Her hands were shaking. She grabbed her microphone, her voice a raw, desperate cry that echoed through the silent room. "You can't do this. This is a family matter." It was her last card, the appeal to a different set of rules, to a court of sentiment that no longer had jurisdiction. I looked at her from the lectern, not with hatred, but with a final, cold finality. "You're right, Tessa," I said, my voice steady, carrying to every corner of the auditorium. "Family has laws, it has trusts, and wills, and obligations. You broke those." I paused, letting my gaze sweep from her to the shareholders. "And this company has standards. It has a code of conduct, fiduciary duties, and a responsibility to every person in this room. You broke those too." I leaned into the microphone for the last time. The one thing they have in common? Both choose the truth. This vote stands. The corporate secretary, his face now a mask of grim acceptance, turned to his microphone. "The resolution passes. The motion is carried." A wave of applause started, then stopped, then started again. It was not the unified, polite clapping from before. It was a fractured, uneven sound, the sound of shock, of grudging respect, of fear, and of the shifting of tectonic plates of power. But it was enough. It was more than enough to make the glass panels of the auditorium vibrate. I looked at the clock on the screen. It had frozen. 9:31 a.m. 17 minutes. It had taken 17 minutes to dismantle an empire and rebuild it in my own image. The applause, uneven as it was, faded into the background as security began to escort a shell-shocked Tessa from the dais. I handed the microphone back to the corporate secretary and stepped off the stage, my legs steady, my mind a blank slate of cold, procedural calm. The fight was over. Now came the autopsy. A member of the executive security team, a man named Harris, whose face I knew, but whose name I had never used, approached me. "Ms. Mercer, Ms. Caro has requested to speak with you. We've secured a private room." I nodded. It was inevitable. He led me away from the dispersing crowd, through a set of unmarked doors into the quiet, sterile backstage corridors of the pavilion. He stopped outside a door with a small, elegant plaque that read, "Maple." "She's inside," Harris said, his voice neutral. "We'll be right outside." I pushed the door open and stepped in. The room was a corporate non-space, furnished with 4 identical armchairs and a low glass table. It was designed for quiet, high-stakes negotiations, a place devoid of personality or comfort. The only feature was a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out onto the vast, gray expanse of the executive parking lot. A steady, miserable drizzle was falling, speckling the glass and streaking the hoods of the expensive cars below. The sound of the rain was a low, constant hiss. Tessa was standing by the window, her back to me. She was still wearing the impeccably tailored suit she had chosen for her victory speech, but it now looked like a costume on a scarecrow. Her shoulders were slumped. The rigid posture of the CFO was gone, replaced by the broken silhouette of a woman who had lost everything. She didn't turn around when I closed the door. We stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound the soft drumming of the rain against the glass. Finally, her voice came, thin and brittle, stripped of all its boardroom authority. "Are you going to kick me out of the family now?" The question was so laden with a history I had never been a part of, so blind to the reality of our relationship that I almost didn't answer. She was appealing to an institution that, for me, had only ever been a source of quiet exclusion. "I didn't do this, Tessa," I said, my voice as calm and steady as it had been on the stage. "You did. You chose to hide it." She finally turned around. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The mask of professional competence had been shattered, and what lay beneath was ugly and raw. "He did this," she spat, her voice trembling with a rage born of desperation. "That old man, Franklin, he manipulated all of us. He played us against each other like pieces on his own private board. This was never about you. It was about him." She was looking for an ally in her victimhood. She wanted me to agree, to concede that we were both just pawns in our grandfather's cruel game. "He gave everyone a choice," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. It was the simple, hard truth. "He laid out the pieces and let us decide how to play. He offered you a choice, Tessa. You chose wrong." Her face contorted, a flash of the old arrogance returning. Choice? He left a fortune lying on the table and expected me not to reach for it? What was I supposed to do? Ava? Let the quiet little compliance officer who never asked for anything walk away with millions while I did all the work? I didn't answer her with words. I walked to the glass table and set down the leather folio I had carried up to the stage. My movements were slow, precise, the actions of an auditor closing a file. I opened it and took out 2 sheets of paper. I placed them side by side on the cold glass surface. The first was the printout from my evidence capture app, the high-resolution photo of the Stonebrook Grill bill. The timestamp was clearly visible in the watermark, 8:41 p.m. "This was a personal dinner," I said, my voice quiet, quoting the recording. "Not a business expense." The second sheet was a printout of the server log, a single, damning line of code. The timestamp was just as clear, 2:03 a.m. "And this," I said, tapping the paper, "is the suppression rule being created, the one you named Family Notice, suppressed." I looked up at her. I had laid the entire crime out on the table, reduced it to 2 moments in time, the threat and the cover-up, the beginning and the end. Tessa stared at the 2 pieces of paper as if they were venomous snakes. The last of the fight seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind a hollowed-out exhaustion. Her shoulders sagged. She looked down at the evidence, at the map of her own self-destruction. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper, a confession not to me, but to the room, to the rain, to herself. "I really thought you'd take it." I waited. "The deal," she clarified, a bitter, self-mocking smile touching her lips. "The unspoken deal. Stay quiet, stay safe, be grateful for the good job. I thought you were the type. I thought you'd bite. I never imagined you'd bite back." She had finally said it. She had finally admitted the fundamental, fatal miscalculation that had brought her to this room. She had never seen me. She had only ever seen a caricature, a quiet girl she could manage, a risk she could mitigate. I looked at her, at my stepsister, at the woman who had tried to erase me from my own life, and I felt nothing, not pity, not anger, not triumph, just a vast, cold emptiness. The case was closed. "I don't do quiet," I said. That was all. Tessa stared at me for one last, long moment, her eyes searching for something she would never find. Then, without another word, she turned and walked to the door. She pulled it open and walked out into the corridor, leaving the door hanging wide open behind her. A gust of cool, damp air immediately swirled into the room, carrying the scent of rain and wet asphalt. I could hear the hiss of the drizzle grow louder, no longer muffled by the heavy glass. A fine spray of mist drifted in through the open doorway, darkening a small patch of the thick corporate carpet. I stood there alone, watching the cold rain fall on the empty parking spaces, listening to the sound it made as it finally breached the walls of the firm. I left the maple room, leaving the door open to the rain. The backstage corridor was cold and quiet. I walked back through the unmarked doors and into the main auditorium. The atmosphere had changed. The initial shockwave had passed, leaving behind a stunned, hyper-aware silence. No one had left their seats. The 200 shareholders, the board members, the executive team, they all sat motionless, a captive audience waiting for the final act of a play they hadn't known they were watching. They looked at me as I emerged, their expressions a mixture of fear, awe, and pure, uncut curiosity. I was no longer Ava Mercer, the quiet compliance officer. I was a black swan event, a walking, talking market correction. I did not return to my seat in the front row. I walked with deliberate, unhurried steps back onto the stage, my path taking me directly to the central podium, the one reserved for the CEO and the chairman. It was a piece of stagecraft, a nonverbal declaration. Arthur Vance, the old family lawyer, was waiting for me there. He held the leather folio containing the trust document. He saw me approach and gave a brief, respectful nod, a gesture that cemented the new reality for everyone watching. He turned to the microphone one last time. For the record, his voice boomed, clear and final. Let it be noted that the transfer of voting rights as stipulated in Section 7C of the Raven Trust is irrevocable and has been electronically certified by the Trust's administrators as of 9:31 a.m. this morning. The paperwork will be filed with the Secretary of State before noon. He then turned to me and placed the heavy folio on the podium. Ms. Mercer, he said, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. The firm is yours. He then stepped back, ceding the stage. I placed my hands on either side of the podium. It was solid, permanent. I looked out at the sea of faces, my gaze sweeping over them, acknowledging no one and everyone at once. I saw David Sterling, his face a grim mask of acceptance. I saw Marcus Thorne, looking smaller, diminished, a king without a kingdom. I did not look for Tessa. She was gone. She was history. Effective immediately, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried an absolute, unshakable authority that filled every corner of the vast room. We will be conducting a full operational review. The first two directives are simple. I paused, letting them hang on the words. First, we restore the disclosure system, all of it, any and all filters, blocks, or suppression rules on intercompany communications are to be purged from our servers within the hour. The era of manufactured ignorance at Mercer & Gray is over. From this moment forward, we operate with total, radical transparency. A low murmur rippled through the room. It was a promise and a threat in one. Second, I continued, my voice cutting through the noise, the independent audit I have commissioned will proceed, and its findings will be made public to the shareholders. All executive and board-level reimbursements will be subject to a line-item review. Misuse of corporate funds will not be tolerated. It will be prosecuted. As I spoke these words, the massive LED screen behind me, which had been dark since my grandfather's video ended, flickered to life. It was not a presentation slide. It was a clean, stark, official notification, rendered in the firm's sans serif font under a crisp Mercer & Gray logo. Raven Trust, Status Update Beneficiary, Ava Mercer Principal Value, $300,000. Current status, active. The number, with its 2 precise zeros after the decimal point, hung in the air. It was no longer a secret, no longer a weapon. It was now just a fact, a public record, my public record. The room did not erupt in applause. It did something far more telling. It got to work. A quiet, frantic energy filled the space, I could hear the soft, frantic scratching of expensive fountain pens on notepads as board members and their aides documented every word. The muted, rapid-fire clicking of keys on laptops and phones rippled through the auditorium as investors sent urgent, encrypted messages to their analysts, their firms, their own lawyers. This was the sound of money reacting to a paradigm shift. This was the sound of a new reality being priced into the market in real time. No one was smiling. The faces I saw were tense, calculating. A power vacuum had just been filled, and no one yet knew if they were on the right side of the new regime. In the midst of that quiet, controlled chaos, I took a moment. I found the red tally light of the main broadcast camera, the one sending the feed out to the secure portal. I knew my grandfather was on the other side of that lens. I looked directly into it. My face was impassive, my voice even, delivering a report to my commanding officer. "Grandpa," I said, my voice intimate yet clear enough for the whole room to hear. "I picked the law, and the moment—" I held the camera's gaze for a heartbeat longer, then looked away. My part in the performance was over. The corporate secretary, who had been standing by like a nervous statue, finally moved. He looked at me, his eyes asking for permission. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He stepped shakily to his lectern, his hands trembling as he shuffled his papers. With no further business before the shareholders," he began, his voice trailing off, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. He was waiting for me to conclude it. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I looked out at the room one last time, at the company my grandfather had built, the one my stepsister had tried to steal, and the one I had just taken for myself. "Meeting adjourned," I said. The sound that answered was the sharp, definitive crack of the corporate secretary's wooden gavel hitting its block. It echoed once, like a gunshot, through the silent, cavernous hall. And then, nothing. The final image was not of the crowd, or the screen, or the stage. It was a quiet, tight shot. My hand, steady and sure, coming to rest on the cool leather of the folio that held the Raven Trust. My trust, my law, my company. Outside, beyond the great glass walls of the pavilion, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We love seeing how far our stories travel and hearing your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. And if you'd like to give this story an extra boost, please consider hitting the hype button. It really helps more people discover our work. We appreciate your support.